typically there is some sort of precipitating event, crisis situation I was in. You know, my mother felt more like an inmate.
Today's guest is Beverly, a trusted board advisor and author with 25 years of experience guiding leaders and boards worldwide. Shaped by real hardship and a career of showing up for others, she brings honesty, compassion, and a powerful perspective on leadership, crisis, and going the extra mile.
And this is an industry that allows you to have a purpose.
Yes,
it allows
it's a gift.
you to change people's lives. It allows you to make a difference for people that are really undergoing distress and a crisis. It allows that. Spent over $700,000 because you went the extra mile for us. They may be well-spoken, well-dressed, but they're going through a crisis. And I think there's a lot of performative stuff that goes on. You can see through that in 5 minutes in terms of who really cares and who doesn't. He couldn't even knock on the door and say hello.
Hi, thank you for joining us on the Lion Healthcare Podcast. I'm Kerry Stewart, the Vice President of Operations. Today, we're taking it in a little bit of a different direction, and we're meeting with a family member who I've built a relationship with over the years, who I deeply, deeply care about and admire. Beverly Behan is joining us as a child of somebody aging and sharing her journey with us as she's managed both of her parents through the aging process. Welcome, Beverly. So yeah, we're just quickly, you and I were talking offline, and I thought this is a great opportunity to jump right into the podcast, Beverly, is just to go back in time. We met, I don't know, I think it's going on close to a decade.
Yeah, it was in 2018, and what I was dealing with at that time is I'm an only child, and I was living in New York City in Manhattan, and my parents had been living in White Rock, British Columbia, for 26 years, actually. They were in their 90s. My dad, was declining mentally, but they were still living independently. And I found myself in a crisis, essentially. And you're the person that helped me out of that crisis. And, when people are often approaching facilities for their parents, whether they're long-term care or assisted living, whatever, I think there's a bit of a mythology that it's, my parent is now of an age where they're happy to go into this situation. Typically, there is some sort of precipitating event that has caused you to reach out. And there's distress going on. It certainly was the situation in my case. And almost everyone I know that's gone through it, there's a health issue. That's what I was dealing with, where a parent, my mother had heart failure. She could no longer cook. My father had, was declining in terms of dementia. And people are in distress and they're reaching out for help. And I think, when we met basically over the phone. I was trapped essentially in Vancouver with my parents. And how that happened is I was in a board meeting in Singapore, and my father, I had people coming in, and my father, because of his dementia, a lot of these young women were tattooed. He thought they were prostitutes. And so there was a lot of sort of explosive stuff going on. And I got a call in the middle of the night in Singapore from a neighbor who basically said, you need to get back here. I got on the next flight. I flew to Vancouver, and the service we'd used basically told us they wouldn't, support us again. And they had kind of blacklisted us because of my father's outbursts at these young ladies with their tattoos. Aww. And some of them were the nicest people, but, in his mind, this is not who he wanted around his wife. And I had no idea what I was going to do with them because they could no longer live independently. I couldn't provide support in-house for them. And it was a 6-hour flight, just the flight from New York to Vancouver. So I wanted to move them to Toronto. And I was lucky in one respect, which is that my mom had saved a lot of money. And so I had the financial resources to, give them as good an opportunity as I could. But reaching out to people, the difference between you and anybody else I talked to is that you genuinely gave a damn and you found innovative ways to help me. For example, as an only child with my parents now having to be in Vancouver because I couldn't, I'll just share with you, I actually had to go back to New York. I put them up in the Four Seasons Hotel and had them provide support for my parents so that I could go back to New York. That's the kind of crisis situation I was in. And essentially what, in a lot of these facilities, it's, you've got to decorate the place, all that. I couldn't fly to Toronto and do that. So you found a solution, which is that the particular assisted living facility, which was one of the higher end ones, you got 1 month that you could of rent, which was $11,000 a month at that point. And you could spend it on whatever. And we agreed that it would be on furniture. And you essentially decorated the place. I called Vancouver in a box and I shipped my parents' clothes. And you had it was like a turnkey operation when we moved in. And I can't begin to tell you or your listeners what a relief it was after being through everything I've been through with my parents, what I was going to do when we actually got there. And there was this gorgeous place and my parents were so happy. And, so you could say, well, that was above and beyond. It was. My parents lived there for over 5 years. And I actually, in preparation for this discussion, looked back at what we spent. We spent over $700,000 is what that company got from us because you went the extra mile for us when we needed help.
Wow.
And I think that's the difference between a true professional in this space and those that are merely order takers.
It's so, thank you for, our relationship. We're here today because I know we really connected around that time in your life. And I think you caught me at a time when I was unconscious in the industry. I was just like, I want people to be happy. I want these families to get what they need and have everything just so. And so I was just unconsciously providing that. And I think going above and beyond, that's sort of just in the DNA,
Well, I think it needs to be. Unfortunately, it's not in many people's DNA. And I think that's the big difference. I think there's a lot of performative stuff that goes on. Oh, yes, we care, and all these slogans and all this garbage. You can see through that in 5 minutes in terms of who really cares and who doesn't. And I think the point I'd like to make to your listeners is the return on that investment of your time and that $11,000 bonus, was over $700,000 that the organization took in as revenue from my parents. Now, could we have left? Could we have found perhaps another facility at a lower price? We probably could have. But we felt that you'd done such a great job that we felt a sense of loyalty to the whole thing, even though you left, before my parents did. So making that investment, you meet people, when you meet these families like myself, you meet them at a crisis point, you meet them in distress. And if you actually give a damn, believe me, the ROI is there not only emotionally, but financially. And, and I think the same can be said of you'll talk to young people and it doesn't matter if they're in medicine or business, I'm in business, or science or whatever. They say, I want to make a difference. I want to make a difference in somebody's life. Boy, can you make a difference in somebody's life? Because people are really in a distressed situation. They may not look like it. They may be well-spoken, well-dressed, but they're going through a crisis and they're trying to navigate a world that they don't know. And finding somebody who can be their guide, who actually gives a damn, it certainly made all the difference to me. And it made financial sense when you look at it, in the cold, hard light of money. We were lucky enough that my mother had, not only saved well, but invested well. And that is something that I think, was sort of helpful to us. But because of that, we had multiple choices in terms of where we would go and what we would do, because we had the financial reserve. We're not a wealthy family, but we had the financial resources, even at that point in their life, to make some choices. And it was because you really cared and you helped solve a very challenging problem. And it was fun in some ways too.
I remember those Kate Spade napkins, and it was fun for me.
It was fun.
That.
And, when they got there and they walked in, they were like, oh, because, most people, my parents didn't want to go into assisted living. They had an absolutely beautiful condo in White Rock, British Columbia. They did not want to leave. They did not want to come back. And I think another point that I would make, just if anybody's listening to this who, is family, I think one of the most important things you need to do right now, particularly given the abysmal state of healthcare that we're in at the moment, your parents need an advocate, and it's the best gift you can give your parents in their declining years is to be an advocate for them. So it was important to me that it wasn't a 6-hour flight. It would have been easy for me to leave them in Vancouver. They knew the area. It was beautiful. There were some lovely properties there. But I knew my parents were going to need more of my attention. And even though I lived in Manhattan, it was about a 45-minute flight up here. And I was up here every couple of weeks until COVID, of course, happened. But and that was super important. I think the other thing that was very nice at this, because my parents had a large suite, they were spending, it was $11,000 a month. It was over $13,000 a month by the time, my mother finally left. My mother now lives with me. I had to move back from New York and move in with her after my father passed away. But, that's serious money. And that went on for 5.5 years. And, one thing that was also great was that I was allowed to stay with them, because it was a 2-room suite. It was a large property. So there was a sofa bed. And I could stay there. And that was important too, because it gave me a feel for how they were living there, what their challenges were, what was working well for them. And I think that helped. But whether, you need to do that or not, I think your parents need an advocate. You need to have a finger on the pulse to just, waltz in at Easter or Christmas. That does not give you
so many issues, right? Like for me, I'm thinking, advocate is important, but it also says, okay, what can we do as an industry to make sure that the public is educated? Like, what is that crisis response when you find yourself in a situation where symptoms culminate with your family member and you now know now is arrived, we have to act now? And where's that receiving blanket? And I think us doing a better job of creating that receiving blanket and making sure people like you, honestly, Beverly, know that there's if there's a medical emergency, you call 911.
Yeah.
If you get into a situation where you don't know what to do with your parents because you've arrived at some point in the aging process that you can no longer handle, what number do you call?
Right. Well, I called you. And,
you called me.
And I'm awfully glad I did. But, I think people in the industry are getting calls from people in exactly the stage I was at. You're calling 911. It's an emergency. You don't need paramedics, but you need help. And what you need most of all is somebody that actually, as I say, gives a damn, because I find most of it very performative. Oh, we can see you at 2:00 and here's our list of services. I mean, the truth of the matter is people are smart. And people are really smart if they have 11 or 12 or 13,000 a month to put down. Okay. So what they care is what is the turning point in the decision is the whether they think somebody actually cares and is going to go the extra mile for them, especially when you're putting down that kind of money.
Yeah. Like the extra mile that you speak of is the hope for me as we unpack some of this stuff and we have the difficult conversations, not for the purpose of having the conversation, but for the purpose of getting better and getting the insights and the honest truth and the emotion from families who have traveled this path, right? There's good things that have gone on. There's things you can check a box and say they worked. And then there are things that I think as an industry, we need to just be really honest with ourselves and say, we have to do a better job. And I think finding purpose, and I know for me, when I entered this industry, being purposeful it just mattered to me. I wanted to do something that made a difference. And that was the paycheck, right? That was the give back to me. And as I said, when we met, I think I was just so new and so green and so eager. I almost feel like I can't take credit for, how you see me, but at the same time, I know I did a good job.
You did a great job.
I know I had your back.
And not only did you do a great job and help me, you did a great job for the company you work for because you netted them $700,000 over the course of 5 years. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And so you did a great job. And I think you've made the point in saying, look, to me, it was about purpose. And this is an industry that allows you to have a purpose.
Yes,
it allows you to change people's lives. It allows you to make a difference for people that are really undergoing distress and a crisis. It allows that. And I think if you're called to that, this is the right business.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think there's a number of people in the business now that don't have that calling. In fact, they seem to be very driven by almost like being efficiency experts or something like that. And I think that's the differentiator. And I would say from the most senior people in management to the most junior people that are, the coal face of the organization, you can make such a difference for people. But if you're constantly feeling that it's just, I've got to do these many tasks and in this much time, and there's this sort of almost industrial aspect to it,
yeah.
which is what I saw happen over the course of time.
Yeah.
That's what turns people off. And especially in this situation. And I don't think it's fulfilling anymore for you. How fulfilling is it to say, oh, I cleaned 12 rooms in record time, as opposed to, I got to know these people. I've made a human connection with people in the twilight of the years who I know I've made a difference in their lives, right?
So it's like you're hitting on so many points. And, it's interesting to hear you speak it from your perspective, because I can see the bullet points forming on the culture slide that you're framing for your organization, right? Like there is a desire and there's an opportunity for human connection in our business. And I know that the leaders of today, I know the people in my industry who I'm collegial with, who are in charge of setting that tone, are very much those people. They care about the industry, they care about the families, they care about the staff. I think we've had to reorganize our strategy and our method of delivering that to get it to a point where, hey, senior management, we really do care about you. We haven't been really great at showing it and driving it right down to the front line. But I think if you ask anyone now, Beverly, I do believe, and I don't think it's perfect, and I know there's a lot of room for growth, but I do think that after COVID and after we realized that what we were selling wasn't the experience people were having. Some were, like not everyone. Some were very happy. But on the ones we didn't get right, we're realizing like we have got to look after the people who are looking after the people, create an environment where people can feel purposeful. And to your point, the housekeeper that goes in and cleans the room in record time, just because she's able to do that doesn't mean she's not willing or he's not willing to be more connected. They just don't have time. So that's what we have to recreate.
It goes back to the tone at the top that management is
100%.
Setting. Okay. And that, look, in my other life, I consult to the boards of directors of the Fortune 500. And
we can take the whole podcast to talk about what you've done.
Take the whole podcast to a different place.
Yeah.
But it really is tone at the top, and even the tone in the boardroom sets the tone for many of the organizations that I work with. And let me just give you an example. There were 2 changes or 3 changes, I guess, of leadership during the time that my parents lived, and then my father passed away. My mother continued to live for about another 6 to 8 months in this fairly high-end facility. And the fellow who came in as the new on-site manager of the property came in, and at no point did he ever come to my mother's suite to greet her. He sent notices to people that they were to come to him.
Oh, sorry.
And so that was, the tone at the top he sent. There were staff there who were frontline staff that you could just tell at the coffee machine, everyone was unhappy with them. They had a chip on their shoulder. They had a bad attitude. They would literally throw the food at you or throw whatever it was at you. And the response was, oh, it's very hard to find people these days.
Right.
So there was no accountability. And same on the other side. What I did a lot is if somebody went out of their way for my parents to help them above and beyond what was in their job description, I would give them the Starbucks gift certificate or the Amazon gift card or whatever it was, because I thought it was important to show appreciation when people did that, because it made such a difference in my parents' lives. And but what I found was that, this sort of new regime of the guy who couldn't even bother, here's my mother spending, at this point it was over $13,000 a month. He couldn't even knock on the door and say hello.
Well, I think even as you're saying that, I'm thinking, gosh, like I worked in long-term care, which is funded publicly. Obviously, the real estate is owned by lots of people who own it privately, but it's funded by our healthcare system, and I think that's the standard for anyone. Is for a leader, regardless of incentive financially in our industry, like to get to that place where the human connection and the experience and looking after people and generating happiness, that's a standard. That's not above and beyond. It's not something you have to recognize because it's everywhere.
Well, I think the term you used, which was looking after people, is the right mindset to have if you're going to go into this industry, whatever your job's going to be, whether you're a nurse, whether you're a housekeeper, whether you're a chef, whatever you are, you're looking after people. Yeah. And I think what I certainly saw in terms of, the decline, and which is the reason I finally moved my mother out of there. I couldn't justify keeping her there for what we were spending, and they wanted to increase it more for the type of service she was getting. Okay. And she was no longer happy. My father had passed away. And I looked at it and I said, for what I'm spending here, we could do something quite different. And so I ended up, I was fortunate enough that, my business was portable. I could still keep my US clients while I was back in Toronto. And, with the occasional trip, I could make it work. A lot of people aren't in that situation, but at that point we made, that was our choice, but we made a choice to change because we no longer saw the caring. We no longer saw the looking after. My mother was diagnosed with diabetes. She was in a diabetic coma for 3 days. And when she came out, the menus were simply, it wasn't, we're going to create something for you because you have this condition. We're just going to take things off the plate that you can't eat. And, it wasn't any way of taking care of her. And we were out buying things, making things, Ubering things in, and we're paying $13,000 a month. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. And this is with a guy that can't even knock on the door and say hello. Right. So you finally got to the point that you made a different decision, right? Well, that's where anyone's going to get to that's spending that kind of money and being treated in that way. They're no longer being looked after. Yeah. My mother felt more like an inmate than she felt like, a resident or a guest in her home, right? Yeah. She felt more like an inmate.
It's interesting. And I'm horrified. Obviously that was not the end we had in mind.
Well,
for
it
sure.
was not how it began. Okay.
Yeah.
It began really as this absolutely fabulous solution. And my parents did have 4 relatively good and happy years there. And I thank God for that. But, after my father passed away and things were opening up post-COVID and my mother was there and I was there a lot, okay, I started to really see the situation and I just couldn't justify keeping her in that situation or spending the money because it no longer had that taking care of vibe.
I really want to zoom in, and again, sure. I am all about having the honest conversation. I think it's a very important quality if you're in service, period. You have to know what the truth is and you have to build from that. And I hope people heard what you just said, right? That was the impetus for you leaving.
Yes.
There could have been a million iterations of quality of service
that
helped you stay where you were.
There certainly could have been.
Yeah.
And, I think $13,000 a month for one parent, they were going to raise it some more. It's still pretty steep. But, she could have gone to a somewhat smaller room and she still would have been a stream of income for that property.
Right.
We got out. I guess we could have looked at other options. I just thought in light of all the situations in my personal professional situation, I would just move back and take care of her.
But what a monumental decision to have to make. I think that's what's having such an impact on me. And I think of, the road not traveled, which would have been, somebody really being the architect of a plan, a contingency plan for your mom or your dad should one not be here with the other. What does that look like for your family? when your mom has a change of status in her health, what does that look like to continue to provide that person-centered care? Like, how do we make things, because you're somebody living with diabetes. You don't have diabetes. So how do we, make sure somebody isn't feeling othered and that you have a beautiful meal for them to eat nonetheless? We are educated in those ways. So as you're saying what your experience is and the outcome of it, I'm thinking, I hope people have an AI listener, a pen to paper, whatever, and are pulling those insights out to go have conversations with their chef, go have conversations with their housekeepers, their nurses, their general managers, so they know if they want to make a difference, here's a list of opportunities to make a difference.
I think, when you talk about too, I'll just go back to the Starbucks gift card thing. What I found had become the environment at this particular facility, which it was still, probably to this day, the most expensive in the city of Toronto, if not in the country. Okay. And the quality had diminished so badly. And everything was sort of the scolding of people who didn't clean enough rooms on time, as opposed to the celebrating of people who made a difference. Yeah. And I think there is something about the celebrating of people who make a difference, and not in a performative way. Yeah. Even though people may be older, one thing I found as well with some of the staff is they tended to, I don't know if this is a word, but infantilize.
Yeah. We use that word a lot.
They would talk to my mother like she was a child. The events they had were coloring books and things that you would give to a kindergarten or daycare. I found them demeaning to my parents, and they found them demeaning. Yeah. And the way that people interacted with them was, so I don't know if there's training that people get. But I think that the approach, it's almost like I just quit my job at the daycare and now I'm at this facility and I'm bringing my, patronizing voice.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so I think that's something, and I certainly saw more of that over time. Yeah. And I'm not sure everyone objected to it, but I found it very off-putting.
Well, and you should find it off-putting. If I can quote Jennifer Lawrence, we should all get off-putting, right? Like that's. Yeah. But it's also like giving grace to our industry and the people in it. Again, we're catching on. We've caught on, and there's now series of trainings. I think again, it's like what's most important is, have we really heard from the families beyond a survey? Have we heard a voice put to, okay, this was my experience, and I do think it's powerful, and I thank you for being honest enough and courageous enough to speak out and also just talk about your experience, both the good and the bad. I know there's education out there. I know what it feels like to walk up to an older adult who is living in a home that I work in, and they're cute and sweet and lovely, and you build this great relationship. But on no planet do we speak to them like you would a child. And it is a natural response for some people to get cute and get sweet and use your sort of patronizing voice, as you called it. But it longs for education, and it longs for the substitute. And I think where we maybe haven't hit the mark in the industry, and hopefully we're heading there, is that education is not only available, but there's some kind of experience people can have, so they go, oh wow, now I get why I shouldn't do that. And hearing you talk about the coloring, and even just in that vein, I think it's a powerful message to send to people.
Well, people are you've got to meet people where they are, but I think there was certainly where I found, particularly over time, is people were being met by the staff in more of a demeaning sort of way than I had seen.
Like, here's the activity today, like it or lump it.
It was all
right?
like it or lump it.
Yeah.
And they were things that, my parents wouldn't dream of spending time doing.
Right.
Did
anyone ever come and say, hey, what do your parents like to do? And could
sometimes
they
my
model
parents,
it?
My parents were, so you bring up an important issue. But before we get there, we'll talk about group activities, okay? Because I think there's big downsides of group activities.
Yeah.
Okay, I think
It's
there's
not
some
for
upsides,
everyone.
and I think there's some downsides. So we'll talk about that in a minute. And I also think that's a shift that I think is probably going to happen in this industry, in terms of where I see it going. And it has to do with the fact that, I'm nearly 66 personally, and, I don't know, hopefully I'm at least 20 years away, but you're getting a more tech savvy person that is getting more into these facilities. And, what we found, I'm way off where I was going to go.
No, it's okay. Go.
Where what we found, and even with my parents in there, I was in New York, so we were doing Zooms, and I had taught my mother how to Zoom, but sometimes she would forget the button or she'd hit the wrong thing. And there was a young man, his job was not technology. I don't know what it was, but he happened to be this tech savvy guy. He was fabulous. He's the guy that probably got more of the Amazon and Starbucks gift cards than anybody.
Yeah.
But if you're running a facility like that right now, you need somebody on your staff that's a tech expert, that's on call to help the people there, because they're connecting with their loved ones over Zoom or over these different, technology platforms that a lot of them are unfamiliar with, or they just hit the wrong button and, oh my God, what am I going to do?
It's so funny, Beverly. I'm going to have to, you are, as always, a trailblazer and always ahead of your time. So I literally was just sent an article yesterday, and I wish I could recall it off the top of my head who it is, the company name, because I'd give them a good plug right now. But they finally, after all this time, have technology that's one touch, where Zoom happens or a video call takes place. And it is targeted at
older people,
older adults.
Yeah.
And to your point, if you have parents who want to connect with their children, their grandchildren, what have you, it was not an easy thing to do. And maybe the learning of new tasks wasn't something that was, really tenable for all families. So this is good technology, but it also...
Well, you still need somebody on site that can help.
100%.
Even if it's one button, it's never foolproof. Somebody is always going to do something, and they need somebody to help them. And I had a friend who had a parent in a facility in the United States, and they were told, well, someone will help them Zoom with you at this time between 3 and 4 on Wednesday afternoon. That doesn't work for people, and it doesn't work for families. And they can learn to do that, but oh my God, we haven't got the microphone on, or this has happened, or we've hit this button, we can't get into Zoom anymore.
So true.
You need to have somebody on site at these facilities right now that can help people with technology, because
I feel like
technology
a
is
runner, like somebody who's almost like your handyman, but in other ways.
It's exactly that.
That it's like, okay, dial him up or her up, and away they run.
And it's not that should be maybe their only job,
right?
Okay, but that there should be a criteria that you have somebody on site, and particularly in the evening, because that's when they want to connect with their children or their grandchildren or whoever who are home from school or home from work or what have you. That's when they need the help. And they need somebody there to do that, for them. And I think you need somebody like that on staff. And that by itself is going to be so helpful to people, because if they can't get that help, they can't connect with the people they love, and they're losing that part of their life.
It's so true. And I do think you're right. And it's like, we've had some conversations about the evolving needs of older adults and how the demographic itself is going to change, and what makes them happy, what things that they're interested in, all of that is shifting. And I know that healthcare is, the little engine that could, but it's not always forging forward as, an innovator. We catch up eventually, and we're starting to, but I think what I'm most excited about is that, we have a jumping off point of real information, real experience, dollars and cents. So it's, if you're talking about private retirement, it's a business, and it's a business built on many different layers of, asset management and operations, and, some are publicly traded. So, you have the shareholders and you have stakeholders that you have to satisfy in that scenario. But if the choice is to have older adults living in the properties you own, the operations of that has to be built on the real thing. It has to be built from people who care, who want to make a difference, who are going to their job with a purpose, and put relationships and our customer at the center of everything that we do.
Well, I mean, let's talk about the shareholders, okay? Because if you're going to invest in this industry, you want to see a healthy return on that investment, right? So it's not an either or that you're going to satisfy it or you're going to help people have a good quality of life. It's the having the good quality of life. It's the showing people that you care. That's what generates the stream of income.
Correct.
That's how the company you used to work for got $700,000 of my money, right? So they're completely the same thing. And I think there's this misdirection, which is you can either be good to people or you can please the shareholders. And I think that's a big fallacy. And I would say that most private equity firms are wise enough that they actually go beyond that. But I think there's some people in middle management that still seem to have that mentality. And so I would say that's something you want to break through. I would say another thing is the whole idea of surveys. I mean, the work that I do in my real life is I work with boards of directors, mostly Fortune 500 public companies. And I do a lot of work of something called a board evaluation, okay? I would never dream of using a survey for a board evaluation. That is antique stuff that I did when I first got into this business 26 years ago, okay? Why is that? Because it doesn't give you enough texture, circle 5 and all of that. It's fine for the intervening years. But when I'm hired by a big company, I want to go and I want to talk to people. I want to find out what's going on. And, every year would come this survey and the questions were worded just so, this is appropriate, this is adequate, So there was no real way to do it. And it was just a defensive mechanism for the people in management to say they got high scores. So I really think if you want to, set the right tone at the top, you need to talk to people and you need to find out what's really going on. And you need to reward the good as well as be a little less tolerant of the bad. Right now, what I think we've got is a lot of box ticking, a lot of sort of apparatchik kind of behavior. And it really comes down to the people in leadership to say, I want to create something beautiful. I want to create something inspiring. I don't do that by circle 1 to 5. This is appropriate. This is adequate.
Adequate and appropriate, just like those are words that we should be allergic to, frankly.
Well, that's what's in every one of the Talk to the Family surveys I ever saw.
Yeah, I think it's like you're hitting a nerve for me too, because I also, I grew up in the industry and I have a lot of love for, my own career and my own experiences. And I can only look around the room and say, there's a handful of companies that really get it. They really understand. And you will never see them on social media posting, my survey returned all 5s. I got all 5s, or I have 100% occupancy. We don't speak in occupancy and what we got. To me, we speak in how many lives did we change? How many people did we impact? How many connections that have lasted, 8 years, 9 years, 10 years through the ups and downs? How many of those can you count yourself as having? Because the goal is not to make a list of the people. The goal is to forget the number of people that you've actually impacted because you've impacted so many. Celebrate that. Celebrate that you've made a difference in someone's life. And I think it's meant well, right? It's meant well. But I think to your point, the sophistication and the intelligence at the table goes beyond like the initial layer of a survey. People want connection. People want more substance. And I think we ought to be more willing to have those conversations.
Well, what gets measured gets managed.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if your measurement tool is a circle 1 to 5, this is adequate, this is appropriate, that's what's going to get managed too. Yeah. If you say, I want to create what you just described, which is, a place where you've changed people's lives, you've given the last, years of their lives have been rewarding and fulfilling and quite beautiful versus what they could have been. Okay. You got to find a different way to measure that. And it isn't circle 1 to 5 and this is adequate and this is appropriate. Right. And you've got to reward people that are creating that culture and that environment. And I'll be just really candid with you. I didn't see very much of that. And I do think that is an opportunity for people in leadership roles in this industry. I think it's a huge opportunity.
And
I think you can really differentiate yourself. I mean, it's such a low bar.
I know. That's why I'm laughing, because I'm thinking, oh gosh, and I'm very careful, because my goal as a podcast host is to do whatever I can to support the industry, to bring out the good, the bad, the awful, the amazing.
Yeah.
But let's level set and hear the truth. That's it. And then we can grow from there. And I knew going into this conversation, I was not immune to how this was going to go, because we've kept in touch, and I know your feelings, but I also know this, Beverly, you're fair and you're reasonable, and you give credit where credit is due. You're not somebody who is just raging angry at your experience. You looked at it from a financial perspective. You looked at it from a quality of life perspective. You looked at it from a care and services perspective. What was available to my family?
Yep.
And then through conversations over the years, there were things you knew, things you didn't know. We go back to when your dad wasn't well, and you didn't realize a team of people could come home and let him convalesce and do end of life with your mom by his side.
Right.
And I felt like we failed you because you didn't know that.
Right.
And so.
But it goes back to, people that really care and make a difference, right?
Yeah.
Just a segue to another thing, right now in Ontario, people are struggling to find doctors. People are struggling to get the kind of healthcare. And that was one thing that was good about the facility we had. There was someone in-house, okay? And, mixed views on the person, but I thought he was a kind elderly chap, and I was glad to have him there. Okay. He got to know my parents. He had no problem coming and sitting down with them in their suite, as opposed to the guy who was running the place who couldn't even, go up to the third floor. And that's a huge win. Okay. And it's also a differentiator. I think in today's environment, that was one of the biggest things I wrestled with in terms of taking my mom out of there. Was how was I going to find her a doctor? She is not very mobile anymore. What was I going to do? And that has been a challenge since I moved her out. So that was one thing, when you sort of said, well, what were some of the things that, you wrestled with? That was a big issue. And I think that is a big issue for people now.
It's a great highlight, because I think access to, at least medical care, continuous medical care. I know it's tough to do bedside medicine, acute bedside, there's a lot of exits to hospital and different things that are challenging no matter what, when we're getting on in age. And the system is doing different things. I think we're in a scatter of things right now that will make that experience, slightly less chaotic for the people who have to activate, having a doctor or having emergent medicine at that age. And I know we all struggle with that. And there's some companies doing great things, and certainly policymakers who are catching on to ways that we can circumvent that difficulty. But homes that people are moving into, are we highlighting enough what that medical care looks like, what that, again, that reassurance looks like to families? Because can you keep your current family doctor? Well, not likely, because you moved from Vancouver. So how does that work for you? It's a great talking point for people who are entertaining the idea of moving into a home. And it's a great place to go deep for people who are supporting homes and attracting people to move in there, because medical care is at the forefront of everyone's mind at that point, for sure.
So that was one of the things that I think is an important issue. It certainly was for me. And I think as I've moved back here and I've seen how people have struggled to find physicians, I had coffee with a former classmate of mine who, became a doctor, and she's had a practice for years, and she's my age. She's to the age that she might retire. And she said, I can't let 1,800 people not have a doctor. And so, so having that available on site was a huge thing. And made a big difference to my mother's life. When she went into a diabetic coma, he knew what it was. And when we got her to ER, he told me what to say, and that's what saved her life. Wow. So, that was a huge plus. And so, if you have I don't know, do all facilities have a doctor on site? Yeah. So that's
Most do.
And having someone that people feel comfortable with and that goes the extra mile.
And it's like
it goes back to going the extra mile, like, oh, hey, I'm a doctor.
Like
but
having
I'm
a
there and
doctor's checking a box,
checking the box,
but having one that cares is a completely, and you're right, it does matter. It matters because, again, it's all about what does this full experience look like and feel like as the end user.
Yeah.
And then the circle of care who is supporting people, like you want your parents to be safe. You want your parents to feel like they have access to what they need. And they want to retain their independence. These are evidence-based facts, right? Yeah. We have sort of, as children of aging parents, we have different needs. Be safe, don't trip, don't fall, have access to what you need. And they're like, I'll do it myself, So somewhere in the middle are these services that really bridge that and allow you to continue being this incredible, like writing books, Amazon bestseller. I mean, I've lost count of how many books you've written. And now I see on email you've sent me this, what is it? The Scottish
unicorns.
The Scottish unicorns.
Yeah. So it gets back to how, if we look to the future and we say how, people in retirement and what are some of the things they're going to like, increasingly, obviously, AI is going to be an issue, just like FaceTime or Zoom or whatever it is to interact with your family. And so, my mom and I moved in together, and we live in a very nice place overlooking Lake Ontario, and I'm able to use one of the bedrooms as a home office. And my mother's parents had moved to Canada from Scotland, and I had thought about, what will I do when I lose her? Because so much of my life has been looking after her while running my business. And so what sort of hobbies would I want to do? And we both had this sort of interest in Scottish heritage, and we sort of discovered ChatGPT. And
I love it.
Realized that it could do illustrations and things like that. And before we knew it, we had started an e-magazine, which was a Scottish heritage magazine. And we put the first issue out 3 weeks ago on September the 24th. We have over 1,800 followers on Facebook. And we've got people, I'm emailing a guy who's a film director in Spain who's doing a film about the Black Douglas. I'm talking to people that are renovating a castle in Aberdeenshire. And
that's
it's
where my
really,
family's from.
Oh, is that right?
It is, yeah.
Okay, so it's a really interesting, and so when you look out, you say, what are people going to be interested in down the road?
Yeah.
And I think there's this mentality that is still out there about these group activities. And I guess for some people, they like that. There also tends to be, there certainly was where my parents lived, there was this almost kind of high school cliquishness that had, they sort of found themselves in. They didn't like it. And my mom is not a terribly extroverted person. So after my dad was gone, she had no interest whatsoever in going to any of these events. But there were all these things. It's almost like a school. They would sit for a movie. Everybody would go to this place to watch a movie. People don't watch movies like that anymore. They watch Netflix. They watch Amazon Prime. Okay. Right. So these group activities, I think, are devolving into more individual activities that relate somehow to technology. And it goes back to having a tech person on site because, oh my God, I'm trying to get Netflix and I can't get it and I want to watch, whatever it is. They need some help with that kind of stuff. The group activities, I think, are, look, my dad liked going to exercise class, and I think there's a time and a place. But I'll be honest, something I thought of, and of course, how things devolved, was like, could I get a tutor to come and teach my parents something just for fun? So it would be like 2-on-1 of them with a tutor, maybe anything, French, history, Egyptology, like whatever it was, okay? None of that was being offered. I mean, it was coloring with a bunch of people down in the kitchen kind of thing, or, you just stay in your room and watch Netflix. And so I think there's this kind of middle ground thing. And so, my mom and I developed the Scottish Unicorn as this e-zine, but I think it's emblematic of, as people age, they want to do something kind of different and fun. And it opened this whole world, really, for both of us in a lot of ways, because all of a sudden we're talking to people in different parts of the world. And, we just did a thing because there's a St. Andrew's ball, or no, a Caledonian ball in Hamilton, Bermuda. And we reached out to them and we did a little feature for them. And, so it's really opened up the world. And I think that that's where the future is going. I don't think it's like we're having movie night and we're going to show you, the 5th episode of Outlander. Everybody's already seen that. Okay. So you have to find different things that are going to replace that. And as you have a population that's becoming more tech savvy entering the environment, you've got to respond to that.
I agree. Like, I love that you have, first of all, the bonding experience with your mom, and that as you're talking about what you're doing, I'm thinking about how it is where we hope to get by fighting ageism and making sure that we understand that just because somebody has a certain chronological number, that they were born in a certain year or they are of a certain age, the assumption is, like to try new things, the assumption is they're still educationally curious. They're still, it doesn't really matter what it is. What matters is discovering it and nurturing that as an organization, as a family, as an advocate, and being able to activate that in a way that's meaningful while you're living in a home that, you've chosen to live in congregately for that part of your life. And I think the idea that you've dove into something that represents, your heritage and your past, and I've seen it. So AI be damned, it's pretty awesome. So, however you got to that is irrelevant. It looks fantastic. It's engaging. It's substantial. And when I think of your mom, because I know her and I just, I love to hug her, and just when I think of your mom, I have such good memories of her. I think of what a gift it is to her, Beverly, that you're doing that with her, and it doesn't have to be her daughter, right? Like you're that person. You obviously have that glue,
right?
In that
it
relationship.
doesn't have to be your daughter.
No.
And it has to be somebody that, as I say, gives a damn. And instead of, I find with a lot of these group activities, so they're talking at you, somebody's there to present for you. Yeah. Maybe at the musical activities, people get somewhat involved, but a lot of it is people talking at, as opposed to sitting down one-on-one and saying what would you, is there something you'd like to do? Or even introducing people to some of these things, because, it sort of began, we're going to go a little off topic here, but it began where I had moved back here, and I sent a check to a local Scottish society to sign my mom up as members. And we knew we probably wouldn't attend many of the events, given that she's 97 and in a wheelchair, right? Anyway, three months went by, I think it was, or 2 months since I sent the check, and we never even got an email saying welcome to our group. And I happened to notice that they'd cashed the check, and they'd cashed it several weeks before. And I got in touch and said, hey, we've never heard from you. What's going on? We saw you cash the check. And what we found was it was more of this performative kind of stuff, right? And then they suggested that we attend I guess it was a Zoom lecture. And it was seriously the worst lecture I think I probably ever heard in my life. And my mom, we were on mute, and she's like, this guy's the most boring guy I've ever heard. The slides were terrible. Yeah. The whole thing was really off-putting. And it was out of that I said, we should just create something which is Scottish heritage the way we see it.
Yeah.
And so we started, with ChatGPT, what could we do? Because I've written a number of books, and, the biggest challenge often with books, especially if you want to do and I want it to be like an airline magazine almost kind of thing, so it wasn't like the typical, I wrote it in my basement kind of bulletin board newsletter. I wanted it to be kind of fun, and, you've seen it and people are responding to it. But the graphics were really important, and that's really hard. And that's what AI takes care of for you now.
You can imagine it, and suddenly it's there. Boom. Because it's immediately, first of all, I felt like I was, I've been to Scotland, I've been to all those castles, I've been to that whole experience I have. And so I almost felt like I was pulled into Scotland as I was just looking at the pictures, which is incredible.
That's wonderful. You made my day, because that's what we want to do. That's what we wanted, because we had seen, and I think this is, another sort of lesson in this is sometimes out of things that don't work is born something that does work.
Fair. Great point.
We found, I had found with a number of these organizations, once they took your money and you were a member, all you ever saw from them again is your membership's up for renewal, right? It was never, look, and when people do join these things, they want a sort of a sense of community. And if you reach out to people, that, and I think we found this whole, lecture was just so academic. It was so dry. It was so dusty. Yeah. And we're like, how can we bring this to life? How can we make this more fun?
So stay tuned. I mean, maybe you're onto something. I mean, we around our family dinner table, we often talk about, like, we don't have hobbies. My husband and I both are very work centric, and this is what we live and breathe.
Yeah.
We've suggested cure meat, or maybe take golf up again. Yeah. But it sounds like it's possible that out of really wanting your mom to have a meaningful experience at this point in her age, and also looking at her as a human being who still has vitality, who still wants to create and be part of something, that maybe you're creating something with unintended consequences.
Well, it's already been a great thing in our lives, and it's something that even once I lose her, I'll probably continue, as a sort of a legacy to her. And it's been fun. It's been great fun, and it's opened all these doors. And I guess this is just my point, is that with AI now, I saw something the other day, and I thought about, for elderly people, I thought about it for my mom. It was I can't remember what it's called, and there's a number of different services that offer this, but they'll take an old photograph and they'll make it look like it's come to life.
Yes.
Well, how fun is that for older people? Like, let's get a photograph. But that's not something you so much do in a group, really. Yeah. You do it one-on-one.
Yeah.
And I realize it's less expensive to have one leader for a group of older people. But I do think we're going to a different place. That's not to say there isn't a place for some group activities, but I found in the place my parents were, it was like all group activities, as opposed to people really coming for a one-on-one type experience. I mean, the only person that ever really came in there was they would talk to, the nurse, they would talk to the housekeeper, and this tech guy would come and help all the time,
It's funny. I'm as you're saying that, I'm thinking about my first guest on my podcast. His name is John Beanie. And he will recognize some of what you're talking about. But he made a point that you've just made, and it's all about generating happiness, right? It's all about, what do we do with, yes, it's important to be efficient. It's important to create operations that, frees up time and space for human connection. I know we're there as an industry, and I know we're there as a human race. We know there has to be some connection, but in order to generate that connection, you have to get to know people. You have to take the time to understand what matters to them. And I know that, everything's always evolving and getting better. And I would like to believe that we're starting to move beyond the experience that you had with your family, and that we do have different evidence to suggest a more personalized experience is it's the anecdote to what has gone on for you, and it's sort of the future way of doing things. You can line people up who are like-minded, and maybe they can do some group stuff that feels meaningful.
Sure.
But canning group activities and sort of herding people to that thing and calling it, well, we're mitigating social isolation. That's not. You can still feel very isolated in a room doing something you don't want to do.
That's exactly right. And it's all in the name of mitigating social isolation. But, quite candidly, because of some of the politics, and let's talk about not just the politics of within the facility, but, we're now in an age where politically people are very polarized, okay? Having lived in the United States, it's even more there, but I would say it's not that much different here. And, when everybody's forced into a group, right, the likelihood of there being some kind of fissure, if you will, over politics, it's higher. And people don't want that. Nobody wants that hanging over them.
It's also choice. Like, when in your life have you passed, a certain grade in school, When have you not chosen who your peer group is, or had the opportunity to get to know people and make those choices, right? I don't think the table's set necessarily, and it's a great opportunity for, again, people who want those insights to create a memorable experience. It's like set the table for people to meet each other, really genuinely get to know who's moving in, who already lives here,
Right.
who is from Scotland. Possibly. It doesn't mean, Scotland, now let's put them together. But some real genuine effort in figuring out, hey, these two people might be a really good fit. We should find an occasion for them to get to know each other.
Well, I think that's the part that goes above and beyond.
Yeah.
And I certainly never saw very much of that.
Yeah.
I would see occasionally there was a newsletter that would come out and there would be a new resident and they would profile this person. Yeah. But you might run into the person at dinner, at coffee, what have you. There wasn't like that extra effort that you're talking about to help people build social connection.
And also that works both ways, right?
Yeah.
You may be inspiring a friendship from somebody who already lives there at the same time as you're really curing some of those first day jitters for somebody who's moving in.
Yeah, exactly. I think the other issue though, just when you talk about the human connection, sadly, people in these facilities have a fairly limited life, and I did find with my mom in particular, there were some ladies that she became friends with and they all passed away. Yeah, and so there's, this whole sort of loss. And I think one of the things with her too, I think two things really happened. One is those that were left had this very sort of cliquish group that she didn't really want to spend time with. Yeah. And they were at every major event. And so
it felt intimidating.
She felt intimidated. Yeah. She didn't want to be part of that. Yeah. And there was no one sort of easing that social
It's so
network.
Important. Like,
there was
Beverly,
nobody
that's
easing that.
Unbelievably important point. Like, if we take nothing else away from our conversation to the listeners, it's that that never goes away. Yeah. And that's the ageism piece, right? That's assuming that because I'm 84 or 96, that I don't feel those human feelings of wanting to belong and wanting to feel like part of that. And we really do have a significant responsibility as care providers, as operators, to hear that message and do a deep dive on how to make that happen. Because thinking about your mom and the idea that there was a missed opportunity ever in that whole experience that she was there kind of breaks my heart.
Well, there are a lot of missed opportunities, okay? I mean, just coming from the guy that wouldn't even come to the suite and say hello, there was missed opportunities in terms of her dietary needs, okay? There were missed opportunities all over the place. I mean, her husband had just died. Yeah. One of the things that was very good about that facility, my father was a very devout Catholic, and they had a Catholic mass every so often, and he appreciated that. That was great. Priest never came to my parents' suite. Right. Priest never invested any time in getting to know my parents. The only time I met the priest was at my father's funeral. And he said things about my father, and all he knew my father was from him just being and receiving communion every third Sunday when he would come by to provide it. So, it gets back to this performative, checking the box. Yes, I went over here and I'm looking after the spiritual needs of elderly people. Are you really? Yeah. I mean, you're giving my father mass, which he appreciated, but there was no human connection going on there.
It's a huge message. It's a huge. Yeah. We're coming on to the end of our conversation, and honestly, I just want you to know how much I deeply appreciate you, your friendship, and the relationship that we've developed over these years. That count me as one of those people that do deeply care about your mom and you and how things have went and will continue to go.
Well, I always do. And, that's the thing, is that you were there at the time I really needed help and I really was in a tough shape. And you not only provided that help, you did it in such a caring way. And you changed my life and you changed my parents' life. Well, and for that, we will always be grateful, Kerry.
And it's likewise to you. Thank you. Because I think you gave me an opportunity. You were vocal about the impact I had. And it was so early in my career that I just wanted to keep doing that. So, thank you.
It's a gift, okay? And the more people you can inspire to do those kinds of things for other people, you're making the world a better place.
Amen. Thank you so much, Beverly.
You're so welcome, Kerry.
So good to see you.